In a quiet suburban neighborhood where tree-lined streets and modest homes created an illusion of peace, Maya Johnson lived her life with quiet determination. She was a single mother raising her 8-year-old son, Marcus, with unwavering strength and love. Her days were filled with juggling 2 jobs, working as a cashier at a local grocery store during the day, and cleaning offices late into the night. Despite the challenges she faced, Maya always managed to keep a smile on her face for Marcus. She wanted him to grow up knowing that no matter how hard life got, kindness and resilience could carry them through. Maya's little red sedan had become her lifeline over the past few months. It wasn't much, but it meant freedom, a way to get to work, take Marcus to school, and run errands without relying on anyone else. She had saved every penny from her paychecks to buy it outright, ensuring she wouldn't have to worry about monthly payments. The car symbolized her independence, something she cherished deeply as a woman who had built a stable life for herself and her son, despite all odds. One chilly evening in late autumn, Maya finished her shift at the office building and headed home. The roads were mostly empty, save for a few scattered cars here and there. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement as she drove along the familiar route back to their cozy apartment. Marcus was probably already asleep by now, tucked into bed after finishing his homework. Maya smiled softly at the thought. No matter how tired she felt, thinking about Marcus gave her energy. But just as she turned onto a quieter stretch of road, near her neighborhood, blue and red lights flashed behind her. Her heart sank. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't run any stop signs, and certainly hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she pulled over carefully, rolling down her window and waiting for the officer to approach. 2 police officers stepped out of their cruiser, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they approached her car. One of them leaned down, shining the light directly into her eyes. "License and registration," he barked, his tone sharp and dismissive. Maya blinked against the glare, trying to remain calm. "Yes, sir," she replied politely, reaching into her glove compartment for the documents. As she handed them over, she noticed the second officer circling her car, peering inside with suspicion. "Is everything okay?" she asked hesitantly. "Did I do something wrong?" The first officer ignored her question, instead studying her license and registration closely. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "This car, it's reported stolen." Maya froze, her mind racing. Stolen? That couldn't be right. She had purchased the car legally months ago from a dealership. All the paperwork was in order. Surely this was some kind of mistake. I don't understand," she stammered. "I bought this car myself. I have all the receipts and title papers." Her words seemed to irritate the officer even more. "Ma'am, we'll need you to step out of the vehicle," he said curtly, gesturing toward the door. Panic began to creep in, but Maya forced herself to stay composed. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out slowly, keeping her hands visible. The cold air bit at her skin as she stood under the harsh glow of the patrol car's headlights. Both officers loomed over her, their expressions unreadable beneath their hats. "I can prove I own this car," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, let me show you the paperwork." Instead of listening, the officers exchanged glances, their body language tense and unyielding. "We'll sort this out at the station," one of them said flatly, grabbing her arm firmly and guiding her toward the cruiser. Fear gripped Maya as she realized the situation was escalating far beyond reason. How could this happen? Why weren't they listening to her explanations? The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. For the first time in years, she felt utterly powerless. As they placed her in the back seat of the patrol car, Maya's thoughts raced. She needed help. But who could she turn to? Then it hit her. There was one person who would know exactly what to do. One person who wouldn't stand idly by while injustice unfolded. Her father, Colonel James Ironhawk Rivers, wasn't just any man. He was a legend in his own right, a retired Delta Force commander whose name inspired awe and respect wherever it was spoken. Though Maya rarely talked about him or relied on his reputation, she knew deep down that her father would move heaven and earth to protect his family. And tonight, She desperately needed him. With shaking hands, Maya managed to retrieve her phone before the officers confiscated it. She dialed her father's number, her heart pounding as the call connected. When his deep, steady voice answered, she nearly broke down in tears. "Dad, I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "They think my car is stolen, but it's not true. They won't listen to me." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then, Colonel Rivers' tone shifted, becoming firm and resolute. "Stay calm, sweetheart," he said, his voice radiating authority. "Tell me where you are. I'm coming." For the first time since the ordeal began, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Her father wouldn't let anyone hurt her or Marcus, not if he had anything to say about it. The ride to the police station was a blur for Maya. She sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her hands clenched tightly together as she tried to steady her breathing. The officers had barely spoken to her since placing her in the vehicle, their silence heavy and oppressive. Every bump in the road seemed to echo louder than it should, amplifying her growing anxiety. Her mind raced with questions. How could they accuse her of stealing a car she legally owned? Why weren't they even bothering to check her paperwork? And most importantly, what would happen next? When they arrived at the station, Maya was led inside, her footsteps echoing against the cold, tiled floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the sterile walls. Officers moved about, some typing on computers, others chatting casually near desks. To them, she was just another person brought in for questioning, but to Maya, this felt like a nightmare come true. She was directed to sit on a hard plastic chair in a dimly lit corner of the room. One of the officers who had pulled her over stood nearby, arms crossed, while the other disappeared behind a closed door. Maya glanced around nervously, taking in the unfamiliar faces and the weight of their indifference. No one looked at her, with kindness or curiosity, just blank stares or outright suspicion. As the minutes dragged on, frustration began to build within her. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet here she was, treated like a criminal. When she asked if she could call a lawyer or retrieve her phone to gather evidence proving her innocence, the officer standing guard simply shook his head. "You'll get your chance," he muttered dismissively, avoiding eye contact. Maya's heart sank further. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. She had always followed the rules, paid her taxes, raised Marcus with love and discipline, and worked tirelessly to provide for them both. Yet tonight, none of that seemed to matter. It felt like no matter how politely she spoke, or how many times she explained herself, her words fell on deaf ears. Then came the moment that broke her composure entirely. One of the officers returned with her phone in hand, which she had been using earlier to record the interaction during the traffic stop. He held it up accusingly. "What exactly were you trying to do here?" he demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. I was recording because I wanted to document what happened," Maya stammered, her voice trembling. "I thought maybe someone would see that I'm telling the truth." The officer scoffed, shaking his head as though her explanation was absurd. "That's resisting arrest, ma'am," he said coldly. "We don't tolerate people interfering with our duties." Resisting arrest? The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. She hadn't resisted anything. She had cooperated fully, answering their questions and following their instructions. But now they were twisting her actions into something sinister. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how quickly this situation was spiraling out of control. Her thoughts turned to Marcus, waiting for her at home. What would he think when she didn't return? Would he be scared, angry, confused? Maya couldn't bear the idea of him seeing her like this, vulnerable, scared, and powerless. She had always tried to shield him from the harsh realities of life, wanting him to grow up believing in fairness and justice. But tonight, those ideals felt shattered. Desperation clawed at her chest. If only there was someone who could help her make sense of this mess, someone who wouldn't let these accusations stand unchallenged. That's when she remembered her father again. Colonel James Ironhawk Rivers. His name alone carried weight. But more importantly, he was her dad. The man who had taught her to stand tall in the face of adversity, to never back down when she knew she was right. Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, Maya managed to ask for one final phone call. The officer hesitated before reluctantly handing over a landline phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her father's number, each ring feeling like an eternity. When his deep, commanding voice finally answered, relief washed over her, but only briefly. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she'd endured. "They're saying my car is stolen, but it's not. I swear I bought it legally. They won't listen to me, and now they're saying I resisted arrest." Her words tumbled out in a rush, raw and unfiltered. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Colonel Rivers' voice came through, calm but unmistakably firm. "Where are you, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone shifting from concern to steely resolve. "Tell me exactly where you are. I'm coming." Those simple words sent a surge of hope coursing through Maya. She rattled off the address of the police station, her voice steadying slightly as she clung to the promise of her father's arrival. Though she didn't fully understand what he planned to do, she trusted him completely. If anyone could turn this situation around, it was him. After hanging up, Maya leaned back in her chair, clutching the receiver tightly for a moment longer than necessary. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to imagine a different outcome, one where the truth prevailed and justice was served. But even as she pictured her father walking through the doors, ready to fight, for her, doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. Would his presence really make a difference? Or would the system continue to grind her down, indifferent to her pleas? Little did Maya know her father wasn't planning to arrive alone. Colonel Rivers had spent decades leading elite teams into impossible situations, and he knew better than anyone that preparation was key. Within minutes of ending the call, he sprang into action, reaching out to trusted contacts, former comrades from his Delta Force days who owed him favors and shared his commitment to doing what was right. Together, they devised a plan to ensure Maya's side of the story wouldn't be ignored. As the hours ticked by, Maya remained seated in the station, her emotions seesawing between fear and hope. Outside, the night grew darker, but somewhere in the distance, wheels were turning. Colonel Rivers was on the move, gathering resources, reviewing legal precedents, and preparing to confront the very people who had wronged his daughter. He wasn't just coming to clear her name, he was coming to remind everyone involved that accountability mattered, especially when power was misused. For Maya, the wait felt endless, but deep down she knew one thing for certain. Her father's arrival would change everything. Whether the officers realized it yet or not, they were about to meet a force far greater than themselves, a man who wouldn't hesitate to protect his family no matter the cost. Hours passed, though to Maya it felt like an eternity. The cold metal chair beneath her began to feel unbearable, and the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights above grated on her nerves. She had replayed the events of the night over and over, in her mind, searching for any detail that might explain why she was being treated this way. But no matter how hard she tried, nothing made sense. All she could do now was wait and pray her father would arrive soon. Outside the police station, the quiet suburban streets remained eerily still. A light drizzle began to fall, dampening the pavement and reflecting the glow of distant streetlights. It was the kind of weather that made people want to stay indoors, wrapped in blankets with a warm cup of tea. Yet somewhere out there, Colonel James Ironhawk Rivers was cutting through the darkness, his presence as unyielding as the storm clouds gathering overhead. When Colonel Rivers finally arrived, he wasn't alone. Accompanying him were two former Delta Force comrades, men who had served alongside him during some of the most intense missions of their careers. They weren't dressed in uniforms or tactical gear. Instead, they wore plain clothes, blending seamlessly into the background. But their demeanor told a different story. Each step they took radiated authority, their movements precise and deliberate, as if every action had been calculated long before it happened. As they approached the entrance of the police station, heads turned. Officers milling about glanced up from their desks, curiosity flickering across their faces. There was something about these men, an air of command, a quiet confidence, that demanded attention. Even the receptionist behind the front desk straightened slightly as Colonel Rivers stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. "I'm looking for my daughter," he said, his voice steady but firm enough to cut through the low murmur of activity in the room. "Maya Johnson, she's here." The officer at the desk hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the imposing figure standing before him. After a moment, he gestured toward a side hallway. "She's in holding," he replied cautiously. "You'll need to speak with Detective Harris first." Colonel Rivers nodded once, his expression unreadable. Without another word, he motioned for his companions to follow him deeper into the station. As they walked, whispers rippled through the room. Some officers recognized the name Rivers immediately. It carried weight, not just because of its association with military excellence, but because of the man himself. Stories of his exploits had circulated for years, whispered in awe among those who understood what it meant to serve under someone like him. Detective Harris, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience, was waiting for them in a small interrogation room. He stood as Colonel Rivers entered, offering a curt nod. "Colonel Rivers," he acknowledged, his tone respectful but wary. "What brings you here tonight?" "My daughter is being held unjustly," Colonel Rivers replied without preamble. His eyes locked onto Harris's, unwavering and piercing. "I've reviewed the details of her case, or lack thereof, and I expect answers. Now." Harris shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the colonel's gaze. Though he prided himself on remaining calm under pressure, there was something unnerving about facing a man whose reputation preceded him. Still, he attempted to maintain control of the situation. "Look, Colonel, we're just doing our job. Your daughter was pulled over under suspicious circumstances, and discrepancies arose regarding her vehicle ownership." "Discrepancies?" Colonel Rivers repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Or incompetence? Because let me be clear, Maya purchased that car legally. Every document, title, registration, receipts is accounted for. If your officers bothered to verify the facts instead of jumping to conclusions, none of this would have happened." Harris opened his mouth to respond, but Colonel Rivers wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, his tone sharpening, "the manner in which she has been treated tonight is unacceptable. Accusing her of resisting arrest when all she did was try to record the interaction? That's not law enforcement, that's abuse of power." The room fell silent. Harris glanced at the two men flanking Colonel Rivers, noting the way they stood, shoulders squared, hands clasped loosely in front of them, as if ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. For the first time in years, Harris felt a flicker of unease. These weren't ordinary civilians. They were soldiers trained to handle situations like this with precision and purpose. Knowing he couldn't argue further without risking escalation, Harris relented. "We'll look into it," he said quickly, reaching for the folder containing Maya's case file. "But protocol dictates justice," Colonel Rivers interrupted, his voice rising slightly but never losing its measured tone. "And right now my daughter isn't getting any. So unless you want this entire department scrutinized for misconduct, I suggest you start cooperating." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And everyone in the room knew it. While Harris scrambled to review the evidence, Colonel Rivers' team sprang into action. One of them headed outside to photograph the scene where Maya had been pulled over, ensuring they captured every detail before anything could be tampered with. The other began quietly interviewing witnesses, residents who had seen the traffic stop unfold from their windows or porches. Their efficiency was remarkable, each man operating with the same level of focus and coordination that had defined their military careers. Back inside the station, Colonel Rivers insisted on seeing Maya immediately. When she was finally brought into the room, her face lit up with relief at the sight of her father. Tears welled in her eyes as she rushed toward him, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders. For a brief moment, the world seemed to fade away. leaving only the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone anymore. "It's okay, sweetheart," Colonel Rivers murmured, pulling her close. "I'm here. We're going to fix this." Maya nodded, clinging to him tightly. She wanted to tell him everything, to explain how scared and humiliated she'd felt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply rested her head against his chest, drawing strength from his presence. Turning back to Harass, Colonel Rivers laid out his demands. "Release my daughter now," he said firmly, "and provide me with copies of all documentation related to this incident. My team will conduct an independent investigation, and if I find even a hint of wrongdoing, trust me, you'll regret it." Harass hesitated, but there was no denying the gravity of the situation. With mounting pressure from Colonel Rivers and the growing pile of evidence stacked against them, the officers involved in Maya's arrest had little choice but to comply. Reluctantly, Harass signed the release papers, allowing Maya to leave the station. As they stepped outside together, the cool night air hit Maya like a wave, clearing her head and grounding her in the present. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the sleek black SUV parked nearby. Inside, his team waited, ready to escort them home safely. For the first time since the ordeal began, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be questions to answer and battles to fight. But she knew one thing for certain. Her father wasn't just a Delta Force commander. He was her protector, her advocate, and her rock. And with him by her side, she believed they could overcome anything. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, Colonel Rivers glanced at Maya in the rearview mirror. His expression softened, though his resolve remained unshaken. "This isn't over," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Not by a long shot. The days following Maya's release from the police station were a whirlwind of activity. Colonel Rivers and his team worked tirelessly, piecing together every detail of the incident to expose the truth. They didn't just rely on official reports or statements. They dug deeper, uncovering evidence that painted a damning picture of misconduct and abuse of power. One of Colonel Rivers' former comrades, Marcus Kane, a man known for his meticulous attention to detail, had spent hours reviewing surveillance footage from nearby businesses. The cameras had captured everything: the traffic stop, the aggressive behavior of the officers, and even the way they ignored Maya's attempts to explain herself. It was all there in black and white, or rather, grainy digital video, but it told a story far more compelling than any report ever could. Meanwhile, another member of the team, Daniel Hayes, had tracked down witnesses who had seen the altercation unfold. Neighbors who lived along the quiet suburban street where Maya was pulled over recounted what they'd observed. One elderly woman described how the officers had surrounded Maya's car almost immediately, their body language aggressive even, before she stepped out. Another witness, a young father walking his dog, confirmed that Maya had remained calm throughout the encounter, despite the escalating tension. With this mounting evidence, Colonel Rivers knew they had enough to turn the tide. But he wasn't content with simply proving Maya's innocence. He wanted accountability, so he took matters into his own hands, contacting influential figures within the community to amplify their voices. Local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the involvement of a decorated Delta Force commander fighting for justice on behalf of his daughter. Headlines blared across newspapers and social media feeds. Single mother wrongfully accused after routine traffic stop, and Delta Force veteran steps in to challenge police misconduct. Public outrage grew quickly. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and "End racial profiling." Community leaders held rallies, calling for transparency and reform. People from all walks of life joined the movement, united by a shared desire to see fairness prevail. For many, Maya's story struck a chord. It wasn't just about one woman. It was about countless others who had faced similar injustices but lacked the resources or support to fight back. Inside the police department, the pressure mounted. Internal affairs launched an investigation into the officers involved, spurred on by the overwhelming public scrutiny. Detectives combed through records, looking for patterns of misconduct or bias. Meanwhile, legal experts began reviewing the case, questioning whether criminal charges should be filed against those responsible for falsifying reports and mishandling Maya's arrest. Maya, however, found herself caught between relief and frustration. On one hand, she was grateful for her father's intervention and the growing wave of support from the community. She felt less alone than she ever had during the ordeal. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that lingered deep inside her. Despite her hard work and determination to build a good life for herself and Marcus, she had been reduced to a victim overnight, a statistic in a system stacked against people like her. Colonel Rivers noticed the toll it was taking on his daughter. One evening, as they sat together in Maya's modest living room, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," he said gently. "What happened to you was wrong, but don't let it define you. Use it as fuel to keep moving forward." Maya looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I just wish I didn't have to go through this at all," she admitted softly. "I've always tried to handle things on my own, Dad, to prove I can take care of myself and Marcus without needing anyone else's help. But this made me feel so powerless." Colonel Rivers nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "There's no shame in asking for help when you need it," he replied. "Even the strongest soldiers know when to call for backup. What matters is how we respond to challenges, and I'm proud of the way you've handled yourself through all of this." His words brought Maya a small measure of comfort, but she still struggled to reconcile her emotions. She had spent years building a reputation as someone who could face anything life threw at her. Yet now she realized that resilience wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to lean on others and when to stand your ground. As the investigation progressed, cracks began to show in the officers' version of events. One of them admitted under questioning that they hadn't properly verified Maya's registration documents before accusing her of theft. Another confessed that the claim of resisting arrest had been exaggerated, fueled by frustration rather than fact. These admissions only added fuel to the fire, further eroding the credibility of the police department. Colonel Rivers ensured that every piece of new information reached the public eye. He gave interviews to journalists, speaking passionately about the importance of accountability and integrity in law enforcement. His military background lent weight to his words, making it impossible for critics to dismiss him as just another angry parent seeking revenge. Instead, he framed the issue as a broader call for systemic change, a chance to address the flaws in a system that disproportionately affected marginalized communities. For Maya, watching her father advocate so fiercely on her behalf was both inspiring and humbling. She saw firsthand how his leadership skills translated beyond the battlefield, commanding respect not through force but through conviction and clarity. And while she appreciated everything he was doing, she also began to envision a role for herself in creating change. Inspired by the support she'd received, Maya decided to speak out publicly about her experience. At first, the idea terrified her. Standing in front of cameras and crowds wasn't something she had ever imagined doing. But as she listened to others share their stories eerily similar to her own, she realized she had a responsibility to use her platform for good. Her first public appearance came at a community rally organized by local activists. As she stepped onto the stage, clutching the microphone with trembling hands, the crowd erupted in applause. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself before beginning to speak. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," she admitted, her voice wavering slightly. "But I know now that my story isn't unique. Too many people are treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their economic status, or simply because they don't have the resources to fight back." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, drawing cheers and nods of agreement. By the end of her speech, Maya felt a newfound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had been silenced or dismissed. Colonel Rivers watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. He had always taught Maya to stand tall in the face of adversity, but seeing her embrace that lesson so fully filled him with awe. She wasn't just surviving this ordeal. She was thriving, using it as an opportunity to make a difference. As the weeks passed, the momentum continued to build. The officers involved in Maya's arrest were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Calls for reform echoed throughout the city, prompting officials to implement new training, programs aimed at reducing bias and improving accountability. While these changes wouldn't erase the harm already done, they represented a step toward a better future. Through it all, Maya leaned on her father's wisdom and strength, finding solace in their bond. Together they proved that even in the face of injustice, love and determination could spark meaningful change. And though the scars of that night would always remain, Maya and Colonel Rivers emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as a family united by a shared mission to create a world where fairness triumphed over fear. As the weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Maya's ordeal continued to spread throughout the community. What had started as a single incident, a wrongful traffic stop that spiraled out of control, had transformed into something much bigger, a movement for justice and accountability. The story of a single black mother standing up against systemic injustice, with the support of her formidable father, resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about the countless others who had faced similar struggles but never had their voices heard. Colonel James "Iron Hawk" Rivers remained at the forefront of the fight, ensuring that no detail was overlooked and no stone left unturned. His military precision and strategic mind became invaluable assets in holding those responsible accountable. Under his leadership, his team meticulously documented every aspect of the case, presenting irrefutable evidence that exposed glaring flaws in how the police department handled Maya's arrest. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and internal communications all pointed to one undeniable truth. The officers involved had acted recklessly, allowing bias and poor judgment to dictate their actions. The investigation led by Internal Affairs revealed even more troubling patterns. Records showed that 2 of the officers involved in Maya's case had been flagged multiple times in the past for complaints of misconduct, yet none of those incidents had resulted in serious consequences. This revelation shocked the public and further fueled calls for reform. Protesters gathered outside City Hall demanding answers and action. Local leaders found themselves under immense pressure to address the systemic issues within the police force. For Maya, the process of seeking justice was both empowering and exhausting. She attended meetings with lawyers, gave interviews to journalists, and participated in town hall discussions aimed at fostering dialogue between law enforcement and the community. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the attention, unsure if she was truly equipped to be the face of such a significant cause. But over time, she began to embrace her role, realizing that her voice could inspire others to speak out too. One pivotal moment came during a televised panel discussion where Maya shared the stage with civil rights advocates, legal experts, and representatives from the police department. As she recounted her experience, the fear, the humiliation, the sense of helplessness, her words struck a chord with viewers across the nation. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said, firmly, her voice steady despite the weight of her emotions. "All I want is fairness. When someone works hard, follows the rules, and tries to build a good life, they shouldn't have to live in fear of being treated like a criminal simply because of the color of their skin." Her speech earned a standing ovation, and social media platforms lit up with messages of support. Hashtags like "Stand with Maya" and "Justice for All" trended nationwide, drawing attention to the broader issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. People began sharing their own stories, some heartbreaking, others infuriating, all united by a common thread of frustration and a desire for change. Colonel Rivers watched his daughter grow into her newfound role with pride. He saw how she channeled her pain into purpose, using her platform to advocate for reforms that extended far beyond her personal case. Yet he also understood the toll it took on her emotionally. Late one evening, as they sat together on Maya's porch, he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're doing incredible work," he said softly. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, sweetheart. Fighting for justice doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of the world alone. Maya nodded, appreciating his reminder. It's just, sometimes I feel guilty, she admitted. So many people are suffering in ways I can't even imagine. How do I make sure I'm doing enough? You're already doing more than most, Colonel Rivers replied. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't come from one person alone. It comes from communities coming together, supporting each other and refusing to stay silent. You've started something powerful here, Maya. Let that be enough. For now. His words reassured her, grounding her in the reality that progress was a marathon, not a sprint. While she couldn't fix everything overnight, every step forward mattered. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against the officers involved in Maya's case reached a critical juncture. One officer was fired outright after admitting to falsifying reports, while another faced criminal charges for fabricating evidence. Though these outcomes brought some measure of satisfaction, they weren't enough to undo the damage done. For Maya, true justice meant creating lasting change, not just punishing individuals but addressing the root causes of the problem. Determined to leave a lasting impact, Maya decided to channel her energy into founding a non-profit organization dedicated to educating marginalized communities about their rights. Named Voices Unbound, the organization provided free workshops, legal resources, and advocacy training to empower individuals facing discrimination or abuse of power. Its mission statement reflected Maya's vision: to amplify the voices of the unheard and ensure everyone has access to justice. Colonel Rivers fully supported her initiative, offering guidance and connections to help get the project off the ground. Together, they organized fundraising events, reaching out to donors and community partners who shared their commitment to equality. The response was overwhelming. Within months, Voices Unbound had established itself as a beacon of hope for countless families navigating similar struggles. Through this journey, Maya and her father grew closer than ever before. Their bond deepened as they worked side by side, each learning valuable lessons from the other. Maya marveled at her father's ability to remain calm under pressure, his unwavering focus inspiring her to approach challenges with patience and determination. In turn, Colonel Rivers admired his daughter's courage and resilience, recognizing qualities in her that mirrored his own. Reflecting on everything they had been through, Colonel Rivers realized that this experience had changed him too. For years he had prided himself on his military accomplishments, believing that discipline and authority were the keys to solving any problem. But witnessing Maya's compassion and willingness to listen, to truly understand the perspectives of others, taught him the importance of empathy and leadership. Strength wasn't just about commanding respect. It was also about earning trust and fostering unity. As winter gave way to spring, signs of renewal began to appear everywhere. New policies implemented by the police department emphasized de-escalation, techniques, and cultural sensitivity training. Community outreach programs bridged gaps between law enforcement and residents, fostering mutual understanding and collaboration. Slowly but surely, the seeds of change took root. Maya stood at the center of it all, a symbol of hope and perseverance. She still juggled her jobs and cared for Marcus, finding joy in the little moments that reminded her why she fought so hard. Watching Marcus play soccer in the park or helping him with his homework filled her with gratitude, knowing that their future looked brighter because of the strides being made. Though the scars of that fateful night would always linger, Maya chose to see them as reminders of her strength rather than symbols of defeat. With her father by her side and a growing network of supporters behind her, she knew they were paving the way for a better tomorrow, one where fairness and dignity prevailed over fear and prejudice. And as the sun set on another day, casting golden hues across the horizon, Maya allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but she faced them with renewed purpose. After all, she wasn't just fighting for herself or her family anymore. She was fighting for everyone who deserved to live in a world where justice wasn't a privilege but a fundamental right. Months after the ordeal began, the case against the officers involved in Maya's wrongful arrest reached its conclusion. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final hearing. Family members, friends, Activists and reporters filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the judge as he delivered his verdict. The decision was clear-cut. Several officers were fired for misconduct, while the lead officer faced criminal charges for falsifying reports and violating Maya's rights. It was a monumental victory, not just for Maya, but for everyone who had rallied behind her cause. As the gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the trial, Maya felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Relief, vindication, and even a tinge of sadness mingled within her. She glanced at her father sitting beside her, his expression calm yet resolute. Colonel Rivers gave her a small nod, his way of saying, "We did it." For all the hardships they'd endured together, this moment served as proof that persistence and integrity could triumph over injustice. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into applause. Supporters held signs bearing messages like, "Justice prevails" and "Thank you, Maya," cheering loudly as she stepped out into the sunlight. Reporters rushed forward, microphones in hand, eager to capture her reaction. Maya paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before addressing the sea of faces before her. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Together, we stood up for what's right. This is a win for everyone who believes in fairness, equality, and justice." Her words resonated deeply, drawing cheers from the crowd and nods of agreement from those watching live broadcasts at home. The ruling marked more than just accountability for individual officers. It sparked sweeping changes within the police department. City officials announced new measures aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. These included mandatory bias training, stricter oversight protocols, and the creation of an independent review board to investigate complaints against law enforcement. While these reforms wouldn't erase years of systemic issues overnight, they represented significant progress toward building trust between the community and those sworn to protect it. For Maya, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Her nonprofit organization, Voices Unbound, continued to grow, reaching communities far beyond her own neighborhood. Workshops were held in schools, churches, and community centers, teaching people how to navigate interactions with law enforcement safely and confidently. Legal clinics provided free consultations, helping individuals contest unjust fines or fight wrongful arrests, and advocacy programs empowered marginalized voices to speak out without fear. Maya threw herself into her work, finding fulfillment in knowing she was making a tangible difference. But she also made sure to carve out time for Marcus, ensuring that her activism didn't overshadow her role as a mother. On weekends, they explored parks, visited museums, and cooked meals together, savoring the simple joys of family life. Marcus, now 9 years old, had grown wiser beyond his years, often asking thoughtful questions about fairness and courage. He looked up to his mom with admiration, proud of everything she had accomplished. Colonel Rivers remained a constant presence in their lives, offering guidance whenever needed but giving Maya space to lead. Though retired, he occasionally joined her at speaking engagements or community events, lending his gravitas to amplify her message. Their bond had only strengthened through the ordeal, forged not just by shared adversity but by mutual respect and love. Maya often joked that having a Delta Force commander for a dad meant she always had the ultimate backup plan, but in truth, his support went far deeper than anything tactical. It was rooted in unconditional devotion. One evening, as Maya sat on her porch with her father watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, she reflected on how far they'd come. "Do you think things will ever really change?" she asked softly, voicing a question that had lingered in her mind for months. Colonel Rivers leaned back in his chair, considering her words carefully. "Change doesn't happen all at once," he replied. "It's like chipping away at a mountain. One swing of the hammer might not seem like much, but over time it makes a difference. What you've done here, Maya, it's a big swing. Don't underestimate the impact." His answer reassured her, reminding her that progress wasn't measured solely by grand victories but by the small, steady steps taken along the way. Every person educated, Every policy reformed, every voice empowered contributed to a larger movement, a shift toward a more equitable society. As spring turned to summer, Maya found solace in the growing network of allies she had built. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike reached out to share their stories and offer support. Some volunteered their skills to help expand Voices Unbound, while others simply expressed gratitude for the courage Maya had shown. She realized that the fight for justice wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone willing to stand up and demand better. Her relationship with Marcus flourished too. Inspired by his mom's bravery, he began participating in school debates, passionately arguing for fairness and kindness. One afternoon, he proudly showed her a poster he'd made for a class project titled, "How to Be Brave." At the center of the poster was a picture of Maya, captioned, "My mom fights for what's right." Tears welled in her eyes as she hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by pride and love. Even Colonel Rivers found himself changed by the experience. Known throughout his career for his stoic demeanor and unshakable resolve, he discovered a newfound appreciation for vulnerability and connection. Maya's ability to listen, empathize, and inspire others reminded him that true strength lay not just in commanding authority, but in fostering understanding. He became more open with his emotions, sharing stories from his past that Maya had never heard before. These moments brought them closer together, creating memories that would last a lifetime. By the end of the year, Voices Unbound had expanded to 3 additional cities, each chapter tailored to meet the unique needs of its community. Maya traveled frequently, speaking at conferences and collaborating with other advocates to amplify their collective impact. Yet no matter how busy her schedule became, she always returned home to Marcus and her father, grounding herself in the love and support that fueled her journey. Looking back on everything they had endured, Maya couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. What had started as a terrifying night on a quiet suburban street had transformed into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of resilience, unity, and unwavering determination. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she faced it with hope and conviction, secure in the knowledge that she wasn't alone. And so, as the seasons changed and life moved forward, Maya and her father stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had proven that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through, and that when love and justice united, nothing was impossible.